Hans Olsen, Scott Gerard, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Let's talk some football. National college football writer from Sports Illustrated, good dude and friend of the program, Bryan Fischer, kind enough to join us. Bryan, how are you?
I'm staying busy. It's kind of that time of year, but happy to join you guys.
Well, all right, so I want to, like the old office, talk to me like I'm 5 years old. And explain to me the private equity issue going on with the Big Ten right now.
Well, essentially this is kind of they're going to spin off and kind of create this company called Big Ten Enterprises, and that's kind of where they're going to house all their media rights payments, things like you have the Big Ten championship game, like sponsorships that would go into that game. Everything that basically earns the conference a penny at this point is kind of going to go into this kind of holding company, and each school would have a share, and this investment arm of which is the California investment arm and kind of their pension fund investment. Folks, they would own a share as well. The conference office would own a share. There'd essentially be 20 shares in this company, and as revenue would come in, it would get split 20 ways, and then that's how this investment arm would kind of get their money back over a period of 15 to even longer. And I think the issue that there's really two issues surrounding kind of the furor around this in the Big Ten. There's Michigan's issue, which is kind of a lack of transparency, the kind of thinking, especially among some of their board members, in terms of, hey, if we can go out into the market to need money, we can get at a better rate than this. When you're talking about some of the percentages that they would get, certainly USC folks there's that concern, as well as the fact that they are not getting equal payouts to the likes of Ohio State and Michigan and Penn States of the world. So a whole lot of issues, and I think it really has kind of blown up in Tony Petitti's face, really at the exact wrong point of the year, given everything that is going on, given all the talk about the college football playoff. So it is a big issue, I think, in the Big Ten. I think it's probably something that at this point, certainly talking with a lot of folks, it's probably going to be pushed to the side a little bit for these next couple of weeks, and then we'll probably pick it up and revisit it as the offseason comes into focus.
Eventually one of these deals is going to hit, though, isn't it, Bryan?
Oh, absolutely. I think the thing that you talk with a lot of people around college sports, at some point somebody is going to take some sort of private equity, investment, money, however you want to kind of term it, and that'll almost open the floodgates a little bit. And I think talking with a couple of ADs out there, certainly they were kind of hoping that this deal would get over the line so that they could not be the first ones to do that. But I do think it is coming at some point. What form it takes. I know the American has been kind of down the road with a lot of folks. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those schools to look at this in particular. I know the Big 12 has had discussions in the past. That's been something that's even been brought to the Big 12 board in the last couple of years. So this is something that has been circling college athletics, and I think at some point something will get done. I think the issues around the Big Ten, I think, are a little bit separate, because they do involve things like signing an extension of the grant of rights for a lot longer than you'd probably expect. So, I think it's going to be different, but it is definitely coming. And I think come 2026 for sure, somebody's going to cross that threshold, and we'll see what the ultimate form that will take. But it's definitely coming in the sport, and we'll see where it goes from there.
What's interesting is when it does cross that threshold and it does become a reality, where the NCAA has put a cap of $20.5 or $21.5 million in distribution. When that does happen, do we then see the NCAA reevaluate and say, all right, well, if your name is USC or Michigan or Ohio State, you can now distribute $38 million?
Well, the House settlement does call for those increases to come. So I think, and I think this is the bigger issue for a lot of folks, surrounding private capital, private equity. Yes, there are certain issues that they have to deal with. Debt on stadiums. A lot of these Big Ten stadiums, especially, they've gone through renovations the last 15, 20 years. They have that debt on their book. They're having issues still. I think they've kind of finally recovered, certainly from that hole in their budget from COVID for a lot of these schools as well. College sports it doesn't have a revenue issue per se. It has an expense issue, and that's the one thing that is not changing. I think that's the one issue why a lot of these schools are considering this, is because they just cannot stop spending on things. Whether it be coaches' salaries, whether it be now you have to pay the players. You're certainly trying to find even more avenues to where you can pay the players beyond that $20.5 million cap. With the House settlement. So, it is a crazy time. I think it's important to kind of understand the financials, but the same thing, at the same time, there are those pressures for the administrations on campus. The sport itself is probably as healthy as it's ever been. There's fan interest is up. You can watch any game you want out there. Like the actual, nuts and bolts of college football that we see on Saturdays and even Fridays and Thursdays and on through midweek. right now has really never been healthier. And I think that dichotomy, the clashes between those two issues, certainly are going to come to a head in the not too distant future. And some schools are going to get smart and come out of it just fine. Others are going to be in a bit of a pickle, but it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out, with a lot of people having a lot of different opinions on the future of where we're going.
All right, I'm going to throw a little crystal ball scenario, and you tell me what happens here. USC runs the table. They win their final 2 games of the year. BYU runs the table, plays Texas Tech in a Big 12 championship game, and let's say it's a same game that we saw in Lubbock, 29-7, never really in doubt. Texas Tech dominates that game. Does BYU then, as a 2-loss, but both losses coming to Texas Tech, do they get in, or does another team from the Big Ten like a USC leapfrog them?
Well, I think it's going to be very instructive on that question to see where both teams are in the committee's rankings tonight, because there obviously was a pretty big gap. I mean, they were BYU's ranked 12th and USC 17th in the latest, I think, AP poll. So, it's going to be interesting to see what the committee. I would tend to say that probably the Big Ten team is going to get that edge. I know the committee has in the past not said they would punish teams for losing one of those conference championship games, but the fact of the matter is, USC with their schedule that they would have, they would obviously have a close loss on the road against Illinois, which is probably going to make it into the top 25. I think they can finish 9-3. They're probably going to be a top 25 team at the end of the day. Obviously, in the rain against Notre Dame, they lost that one. But, if they were to win out, you're talking about winning against a Michigan team that's probably going to also finish 9-3 at worst and be in the top 20, at least if not the top 15. You got, I think the Nebraska win is solid for USC. You have the Iowa win that is probably going to remain in the top 25. And then going on the road to win a game, if they can do that this Saturday, and I think that's a pretty tall task for the Trojans at this point, but going on the road to win in Eugene against a top 10 team, I think that's going to count a little bit more in the eyes of the committee. I think it is an interesting discussion. I think it's also going to come down to, frankly, what's BYU going to do? If they're going to look like they did against TCU on last Saturday at home and blow teams out down the stretch, especially the starting this weekend against Cincinnati, maybe that does change the calculus, especially if that Big 12 championship game is close. But I think if you're in the Big 12 right now, you probably are a little bit concerned about maybe losing out and maybe being a one bid league this year.
All right, let's set the scenario a little bit for the University of Utah now. So let's say BYU, Texas Tech, they make that run. They rematch in the Big 12 championship. In the meantime, Utah, who's beat Colorado by 46, Cincinnati by 31, Arizona State by 32. Let's say that they beat Kansas State by 30 and they beat Kansas by 30. And they sit 10-2 with big, gigantic spreads and big wins. And similar outcome that Scotty just explained with the Big 12 championship game, Texas Tech with the 29-7 or 29-6, whatever win. And Utah sitting there 10-2 with all these big wins. How does the committee handle Utah at that point?
I think it's fascinating because I think there is a definite discrepancy in terms of how the committee views Utah in terms of passing the eye test, which I think they do in the eyes of the committee, versus the resumes they're going to have at the end of the year. Because I think if you put it on eye test and put it just down to the committee, I think they might at this point go with Utah in some of those scenarios. But honestly, if you're coming down and you're kind of going through the committee, process and putting them up on screens, when you compare the Utes' resume to maybe a 10-2 Vanderbilt even, that could have a win over Tennessee at the end of the year. Obviously, you talk about so many of those SEC teams. I think Miami would have a better case at 10-2, to be honest, this year. And I think that's probably the biggest threat right now for Utah if they're to win out and miss out on the Big 12 championship game. That's the one thing that I would kind of keep in mind if you're a Utes fan. You want Cincinnati to win this weekend so you can get into the Big 12 title game. Like that's probably the best path if you can get that automatic qualifier and not have to worry about all that stuff. And I know that's a tall task at this point and you're needing some help, but that's really the best path, I think, to the playoff for the Utes, because you got Miami out there. If they finish 10-2 with that win over Notre Dame, I think that's even where Notre Dame could be a little bit concerned. If there's maybe only one truly at-large spot kind of going into that final weekend of the regular season, that's the thing that is going to really cause some headaches for the committee, comparing all these resumes, comparing how they've seen these teams. And as impressive as Utah could look down the stretch, I think their only path to the playoff at this point is probably getting into that Big 12 title game and pulling a shocker and getting that automatic qualifier.
All right, it's September 1st, 2026. Is Lane Kiffin wearing an LSU pullover or a Ole Miss pullover?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it's typical Lane Kiffin to hold the wheel and whether there's deadlines or whatever. Like he definitely loves being the center of attention, and he's enjoying this. And I do think he's obviously it's a buy this weeks for them going into that Egg Bowl, so they got a little extra time around the offices to where they're not necessarily breaking down film 24/7 like they would on a typical game week or going through practice. So he's got a little extra time to play the hits, and I think it's just not. I've never seen anything like the family members of a well-known head coach taking visits pretty publicly on private jets to places like Gainesville and in Baton Rouge in the middle of college football weekend. Like it's just that's just perfectly Lane and kind of sums things up. Who knows what he ultimately wants to do, and he is kind of playing things close to the vest in terms of his ultimate decision. I do think we'll expect some sort of resolution going into to that Egg Bowl on Black Friday next weekend. But honestly, I think Florida is very appealing to him. I think the fact that his wife's family is very connected to that program. He's coached in that state before. I think that would appeal to him a lot to kind of be almost the modern day Steve Spurrier with Steve Spurrier. Having an offices there in the Florida football buildings. They've got kind of a lot of things aligned there. But at the end of the day, too, Lane Kiffin also came close a couple of years ago to being an offensive coordinator at LSU. And he knows the power of that place. He knows, especially when things are pulling in the right direction, that's a place where you can definitely win a national title. So I think it's going to be a lot weighing on him. If I had to go out there, I would probably say maybe Florida Lane Kiffin wearing that hat this time next year, but it really is anybody's guess. And, of course, there's the easiest option for everybody on the table. It's certainly for him to remain there in Oxford, but it's one of the wilder situations I think I can remember recalling at this time of year when you have just a coach that has not just his own university, but has multiple universities in the same conference really eating out of the palm of his hand. It's a fascinating thing going into the year.
Last thing for me is the G5 qualifier, certainly coming from the American Conference.
I think so, and I think we'll certainly see if James Madison winds up being ranked by the committee. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they are not tonight, just to kind of push off that issue a little bit later. But I think if you look at, especially if Tulane can win the Group of Five and win the American, I think with their wins over Duke and Northwestern, those are pretty two solid Power Four wins for them, plus the way they would be able to win the conference itself. I think if North Texas were sitting out there with just one loss and to be able to win the conference as well, that would probably be a little bit in terms of the edge for the committee. But it's going to be close, and I think that is probably one of the bigger intrigues, I think, going into that conference championship weekend, not just at the seeding from all those. I think there's going to be a real point of emphasis on the committee, not just to win your conference. If it's the American on Friday night or the Sun Belt on Saturday, you got to look impressive to do it, to kind of get that extra bit of boost for the committee. So I think it's one of the more intriguing situations, and we'll certainly see how it plays out. But would be surprised if it's not the American at this point.
What did you think of the TV contract put together by the new Pac-12?
I think it was solid. And I think it's definitely been interesting that you have not heard a whole lot in terms of the actual figures being tossed around. But I think in terms of exposure, I mean, it's hard to beat it. You're not having to juggle, multiple streaming apps and all this stuff. It's true linear exposure for a lot of their football games. I think we'll see in practice how basketball kind of comes together. You're certainly, I think it was a league that prioritized getting out there, again. Mm-hmm. And, with the new cycle in terms of, hey, this is going to be a little bit of a shorter television cycle. Got the Big Ten kind of obviously hovering in the background as they're going to be the first major conference to kind of renew their rights in the 2030s. You could tell the Pac-12 really prioritized, hey, we want to be out there. We want to make sure that if you're a fan, you can get access to our games. You can watch them on your cable or satellite provider. You can watch them over the top if need be with other options. So I think they did well in that regards. We'll see about the ultimate money, which also comes down to investment in the program. But given the situation they were in, which was obviously a tough one, I think they did the best they could.
Well, we appreciate your time as always. Thanks for hanging out with us. Look forward to catching up with you again down the line.
Great stuff.
Of course, absolutely. Great to be on with you guys.
There you go. It is our good friend Bryan Fischer, Sports Illustrated national college football writer and one of the best out there.